Hello everyone, this is Leah Whitehorse, and in this recording I'm going to be exploring the astrology of November 2025. So as we come into this month, I just want to flag up again that Neptune has now returned to Pisces and is therefore hanging out on that 29th degree of Pisces, the anaretic or critical degree. And it's going to stay on that degree. It's going to station direct on that degree. So it's going to hang out here right up until January the 26th, 2026. And so we have got 3 months of this anaretic activity where there is great uncertainty. Nothing is set in stone whilst Neptune is on this degree. And if you want to know more about this, I did talk about this a lot in my previous recording for October. And I also talked about it again in my weekly forecast covering the 19th through to the 26th of October. That particular recording has more to say about this. But we are under the influence of this very nebulous energy. And also this month, we do have a lot of chopping and changing. It's almost like the tides are constantly shifting. The land is shifting, the mood is shifting, everything is shifting. Nothing is feeling particularly solid. So we have Neptune here at 29 Pisces, then we're going to have Uranus re-entering Taurus, hanging out on 29 Taurus. I will talk more about that when we come to it. There will be a connection between Uranus and Neptune as well. We will have Jupiter and Saturn stationing this month. We've got planets moving in and out of bounds. And on top of all of that, we have a Mercury retrograde. So there's definitely a lot here to capture our attention. So coming into the month then, we're actually going to start with Mars. Mars is going to trine Neptune on the 4th of November. So in other words, it's going to activate that anaretic Neptune. Mars trine to Neptune means that we're being encouraged to act Mars on our faith, on our intuition with Neptune. So there is some kind of level of understanding here, maybe with Mars also in Scorpio, in the sign that it rules. We are feeling a little more confident that we've got some direction, that there is some kind of lighthouse or radar that is signaling the right way to go. Mars then enters Sagittarius until the 15th of December. So the quality of energy changes because Mars going into Sagittarius activates a desire to know more, to chase and find and hunt down the truth, because that's what Sagittarius is all about. It's connected with our beliefs, with broadening our horizons, with our philosophy, morality, ethics. And so when we're in this sign, it's a sign that's associated with international communications and the overseas and other cultures and international connections. So we get a lot of firing up when Mars goes into this sign. Sometimes that can be sort of literally, and international relations can get a little bit tense during this period. And I'm also kind of noting that because Mars will actually oppose Uranus. So it just had that nice trine to Neptune that says, oh, I've got this signal and I feel like now I can act on what my instincts are telling me. But now there's some kind of surprise. Sometimes it can feel like a surprise attack with Mars opposite to Uranus. People do unpredictable things when Mars is opposite to Uranus, or it can feel like that. So there's an element of being taken by surprise. There's also sometimes when we get Mars and Uranus involved in a tense conversation with one another, we can all get a little reckless because there's a restlessness that comes from this combination. Uranus can be very electrical. It's now on that 0 degrees of Gemini as well. So it's all about making these connections. Mars is, like I say, fired up in this fire sign of Sagittarius. So it kind of feels like we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, possibly jumping from the frying pan into the fire type situation. So we need to be aware of what's happening here, what our motivations are, and trying to sort of tune into what it is we actually want from the situation we're in. And usually, slow down is the best guidance for any tense Mars aspect, especially this one to Uranus. Slow down the driving, slow down the walking. We just don't want to end up bumping into something. So, 5th of November, we will see the final of 7 trines that we've had between Pluto and Sedna. So this has been an ongoing communication between these two bodies. Sedna, of course, moves very, very slowly. She has an 11,000-year orbit. So her action is much slower. It's much more to do with evolution, the evolution of consciousness in Gemini. And it's very much a background influence, but at the same time, it's an important influence. I was having a look back out of curiosity to see what happened when these two were in a trine before. And one particular trine kind of just caught my eye because back in the 1400s, Sedna was in Aquarius and Pluto was in Gemini. So they had their roles reversed, but there was still the emphasis on these air signs. And that's what I was interested in because we are in this era of air. And there is only going to be more and more of it as time goes on. And so around that time, there was a big split in the Catholic Church, which eventually would lead to the Protestant Reformation as well. So, there was a lot of kind of movement from belief-based systems to more kind of modern thinking, secular thinking. There was the rise of humanism was around this time. We were going through sort of the beginnings of early capitalism, so moving away from sort of feudal society and what the king says goes kind of thing. So we were gradually shifting from one state to another, one way of connecting with one another to a different way. And we were also moving to a world that was more interconnected. If you think back to much earlier times, sort of 1400s, it was more normal that everyone would live in their own little communities, and you would never really know unless a messenger came what was happening in the next town, and certainly very unlikely to know what was happening in the next country. But the world was starting to get smaller as there was trade. And this was around the time of the Portuguese discoveries, for example. So the world was kind of getting a little smaller, getting more connected, and ideas were being shared that would ultimately rapidly change the entire system from feudalism through to modern kind of capitalism. And there was also sort of the rise of things like bureaucracy around this time as well. So it kind of feels like there are a few echoes from that time because we too are now in this cusp point between the old system, capitalism, which has now moved into what feels like its final phases, and this new system, which we don't know yet what that's going to be, but there is certainly going to be some kind of change. And whilst it's not immediate, it's not happened whilst Pluto was trine to Sedna, I think the seed ideas, the core issues have been seeded around this time. So in reflection in the future, people will look back to these last couple of years and they will be able to identify this was when there was the shift. Maybe this was when there was the split, just like the Western Schism, where there was the breakdown of the church's authority. Now we're seeing something similar where there is some kind of, I feel, breakdown in the traditional structures of authority, mainly because we're questioning everything. And it started with COVID, with all the questions about why we were being told what we're being told, and people arguing whether, science is right, science is wrong, this is right, that is wrong. And that's kind of really set up the original split. But I think in the last couple of years, that divide, and I'm really focusing heavily here on Sedna and Gemini, the sign of the twins, that divide has become more accentuated for sure. Whose side are you on? That's what it keeps feeling like. Whose side are you on? Which thought process are you going to agree with? And then this instinct to rebel, to say no to the powers that be. So I think there's a lot of that is contained within this Pluto trine to Sedna. So we're finishing up with that exact aspect, but it is going to be just rippling away in the background because they are both very slow moving bodies. Also on the same day, on the 5th of November, another culmination, which will be the full moon in Taurus. So now we are at the peak of the lunar cycle. And this lunation always brings to our attention how we feel about our resources. This is Taurus. So how we're feeling about our money and the things that we feel are precious to us. And it also brings up issues of security, and that can also be emotional security, not just financial security. And there is also often some kind of tension between ourselves and others, what's mine, what's yours, and what's in my control, what's not in my control. So there is some tension around this lunation. I will be taking a really deep dive into this lunation chart over on my Patreon. It's also available to my Substack members as well. So if you want to know more, especially if you're really interested in asteroids, I always have a look at what asteroids are connecting with the lunations as well. Then check out the links below. On the 6th of November, we stay with some of these themes that are set up by the full moon, with the emphasis on Taurus and Scorpio. So the moon in Taurus, sun in Scorpio. We will then have Mars forming a sextile to Scorpio's ruler, Pluto. So now we've got the inkling to take some kind of action that will change things. We're feeling perhaps some confidence here. We're feeling empowered enough to make a change. And then Venus also goes into Scorpio on this date. So now we have a deepening intensification around money, relationships, investment. We have a desire to really get underneath the skin of things, to really find out what's going on below the surface. Venus in Scorpio cares about those deep emotions. We need to feel close when Venus is in Scorpio. The challenge is that Venus is not overly comfortable in this sign because it's opposite to the sign that she rules, Taurus. So sometimes we can flounder a little when it comes to relationships and money because we get scared, or because we want to control the situation, because Scorpio is a very complex sign and it brings up a lot of complex, shadowy emotions. And then we're still with this kind of vibe because on the 8th of November, Uranus will re-enter Taurus. So there's a lot of dancing here between Taurus, Scorpio, What's mine? What's yours? What do I need? What do you need? And then Uranus returning to Taurus, now we've got this really big story that we're trying to bring to a conclusion. So wherever this is happening in our own personal charts, Uranus has been saying to us, you need to be freer here. I need to liberate you from this tendency to always keep things the same here. So here is wherever it's happening in your personal chart, whichever house Uranus is traveling through as he goes back into Taurus, he's trying to show all of us, trying to show you that there's a need to break free of old habits, old patterns that keep you stuck. Because Taurus energy always wants to play the safe game. Taurus likes security, safe ground, the known path. We don't like to deviate when we're in Taurus land. But Uranus is saying that's okay for a time, but nothing will grow if you keep doing the same thing here. If you keep planting the same crop here, eventually nothing will grow if you don't change things. And so Uranus returning to Taurus is giving us one last chance to get this job done, to free ourselves, to do something different, in other words, to take a different path, to try a different idea, to experiment, to free ourselves from doing the same thing over and over. So Uranus will go back into Taurus and it will stay on that anaretic degree until December the 2nd. It'll carry on in retrograde motion until the 4th of February 2026. It'll station direct at 27 degrees of Taurus and 27 minutes. And then in April 2026, on the 26th of April, there's a lot of 26s in this forecast. They're quite hard for me to say. Anyway, so the 26th of April in 2026, that's when Uranus is going to go into, what is it going to go into? It's going to go into Gemini. I'm just laughing. I have a bit of a lisp, which you may or may not notice, but I have got a bit of a lisp. So these kinds of numbers just make me laugh. Anyway, so Uranus is going to go back into Taurus. That is going to challenge us just to really get scientific about our approach here, which is interesting because Taurus is such an organic sign. And that's why this feels a little uncomfortable. It's like you're introducing something that feels alien, that feels too different, that feels too modern, that feels too mechanical in this very organic, natural kind of environment. And yet it's one of those times when this outside influence is actually a good thing. So we kind of need to welcome Uranus in. On the 9th of November, Mercury will station retrograde. I will be doing another video all about this retrograde. If I've already put it up, I'll put the link below. If I haven't, I will put the link below when I've actually published the video. So Mercury stations retrograde at 6 degrees, Sagittarius 51 minutes. And it'll go back into Scorpio as well. So it will retrograde back to 20 degrees, 42 minutes of the sign Scorpio, stationing direct on the 29th of November. So we have 20 days of Mercury retrograde during November. And just generally, we're looking at what we believe, Sagittarius, what we think of as the truth, how we want to envisage life going forward. Sagittarius is a very visionary sign. So with Mercury retrograde here, we are questioning the vision that we hold for our lives going forwards. We're questioning what we believe. And then part of the retrograde as it goes back into Scorpio, now we are questioning what's the truth as far as my emotions are concerned. What do I feel deep down inside? Maybe we are going to have to once again confront some of the fears that might be informing how we're thinking if we've been planning our future, but our fears have been in the driving seat, then this retrograde is really going to unpick that. And I get the feeling that a lot of this retrograde is going to be talking about maybe a change of direction due to new information coming to light. On the 11th of November, we also have another station, and that is Jupiter. Jupiter is going to station retrograde at 25 degrees of Cancer and 9 minutes. It will back up to 15 Cancer and 5 minutes, and that retrograde will continue until the 11th of March 2026. So that's normal that we have around 5 months of Jupiter retrograde. The Jupiter retrograde period is mostly for us to go through a period of inner growth, because the forward movement of Jupiter is always about expansion and development and lucky breaks, and the idea that life here is getting bigger and better wherever Jupiter's moving in your chart. You have an opportunity to do more here, says Jupiter. And with Jupiter being in Cancer, there's a lot about increasing our sense of security, particularly emotional security, emotional safety, a sense of belonging, trusting our instincts. And that is all part of this development with Jupiter in Cancer. But when Jupiter goes retrograde, we often feel like suddenly things have stopped growing. It's like I'm getting an image of an egg. And so every day you kind of nurture that egg, and you start to see that the egg is wobbling every now and again because you can see the chick inside starting to move. And then suddenly it's almost like everything stops. And that's kind of Jupiter stationing retrograde. And the purpose is to sort of say, are you going in the right direction? It's a check-in, because we can get very excited and exuberant with Jupiter. We can kind of take on a little bit more than we can handle. We're inclined to say yes to everything with Jupiter. So Jupiter gives us this period of time to check in with, is this really what you want? Is this what you believe is right for you? And are you ready for it? Sometimes we do have to do some inner work, some inner growth to match the growth that we're trying to achieve in the outer world. And that's the purpose of this retrograde. On the 19th of November, Mercury will re-enter Scorpio, but even more important is that Mercury will then be exactly conjunct the new moon in Scorpio on the 20th of November, because that is also the date of the midpoint of the Mercury retrograde, with the Sun conjunct Mercury. So we're going to have this kind of triple energy in play: the moon, the Sun, Mercury, really, really highlighted here at the end of Scorpio. So again, I'm going to be talking about this in the new moon in Scorpio reading, but I just wanted to kind of flag it here to sort of say this new moon is going to activate the lessons that we're learning for this Mercury retrograde. So it might be that this is when something comes to light, a missing piece of information comes out, because Scorpio can be associated with secrets, but it's also just things that are hidden. So it's not necessarily something has been kept from us. It's just that we didn't see it before. But now it feels like there's a message from Mercury, a message from the universe coming through that is going to be important for a new start with the new moon being in Scorpio. This is also the date, the 20th of November, that we will have the next in a series of 5 sextiles between Uranus and Neptune. This is number 2 out of 5. So basically, I'm sort of feeling like this new moon in Scorpio really has a lot of power to it. It's in a sign associated with power. So there's a lot going on here around these last kind of couple of weeks of November. Uranus sextile Neptune, generally speaking, is some kind of spiritual awakening. How interesting it's happening on these anaretic degrees. this acute, this critical opportunity to use this incredibly potent energy, the power of our imagination with Neptune in Pisces, these revolutionary resources we have with Uranus in Taurus, or just simply the potential to free ourselves, to try something new. It feels like maybe we're being gifted a vision, or we're being gifted an idea. Something bubbles up from the imagination that pushes us to take a chance on a new direction. Ceres stations direct on the 21st of November, so she's been retrograde since the 12th of August in Aries. So this too has been an important transit. We've been doing this inner work to connect with our inner mother, because there's been some kind of issues with confidence or assertion or autonomy, or just a failure to thrive. And so Ceres in Aries retrograde encouraged us to find out what we need. What food do you need, sort of metaphorically speaking, or maybe even actually physically speaking? What do you need to feel strong again? So now we've answered that question, we can start to grow again in our Aries house, because Ceres is in Aries. So we can start tending just to the growth of this part of our lives. So it's an important turnaround with Ceres stationing direct. I think some of us will be relieved to know that Pluto is going to return from being out of bounds on the 22nd of November 2025, and we won't see another Pluto out of bounds until next year in August. So we get a bit of a break of this very potent energy of Pluto going out of bounds. Again, I wrote a big article about this over on my Substack, so I'll link that below. Now that Pluto is returning in bounds, it means that the energy is a little less wild than it was before. But I will just point out that as Pluto returns to being in bounds, we're going to have Mars going out of bounds. And that's going to be on the 28th of November until the 4th of January. So with Mars going out of bounds, then that means that our inner warrior is also now likely to act in ways that are somewhat unpredictable, because basically it's gone beyond the path of the sun, and therefore it's kind of in the wild. It's doing its own thing. That's what an out of bounds planet does. It doesn't have to look for advice, guidance, orders, or rules from the sun. It just does what it thinks is the right thing at the time. And so with Mars, this can be great. You know, he can think on his feet and act in accordance with his experience and kind of do what he thinks is right. But sometimes that means there's a wild element at play here, and those actions might backfire. So we do need to be extra careful, in other words, whilst Mars is out of bounds, to just doubly check in with, why am I doing what I'm doing? What is my motivation? Where is this coming from? And what am I trying to achieve? What's my objective? Now, just before Mars goes out of bounds, just coming back a few days, on the 22nd of November, the Sun will enter Sagittarius, so we move into Sagittarius season, which highlights once again the idea of belief, faith, and how we see the world, and wanting to explore, wanting to understand, wanting to get to the truth, to know what the gods know. That's very often the underlying drive of Sagittarius. And then Mars will square the nodes on the 24th of November, just before Mars goes out of bounds. It's activating the karmic lessons that we're going through right now with the South Node in Virgo, letting go of analysis paralysis, letting go of perfectionism, letting go of trying to constantly fix what's broken, and moving to North Node in Pisces, moving to acceptance and compassion and kindness and connection instead of breaking everything apart. In Virgo, in Pisces, everything comes together and there is a oneness that comes from Pisces. And what's been stopping us, what's been blocking us perhaps, is this emphasis on belief and understanding. And so Mars is going to activate this and encourage us to be brave when it comes to how we see the world and to fight for what we believe in, as long as we don't end up in this sort of righteous crusade, which sometimes can happen with Mars in Sagittarius, religious conflict, religious wars, or just this kind of crusading attitude. That's obviously can cause a few problems. But if we're brave enough to pursue that which we believe in, then that will help us to find the oneness and togetherness and the peace that we're looking for. On the 28th of November, Saturn stations direct. So again, lots and lots of turnarounds this month. So Saturn stationing direct in Pisces. It's going to be in Pisces up until the 14th of February 2026. So now we're also, again, dealing with this last part of the transit. So now we've got Neptune in Pisces dealing with that last bit, Uranus in Taurus dealing with that last bit, and now Saturn stationing direct in Pisces dealing with this last bit. So there's a lot of I's to dot and T's to cross. That's the kind of sense that I'm getting now. And so Saturn stationing direct in Pisces says, okay, we have done this work in Pisces, in the house where Saturn has been retrograding in your chart. We've done the work now, says Saturn. Let's put this into practice one last time. Let's give this a go. I know that you can do it. You've got this. You're capable. You're going to master this. And that's the story as Saturn stations direct. We get this turnaround, a sense that we've done the inner work and now we just need to, like I say, put it in practice. Mercury then also stations direct the day after on the 29th of November. So now we really are getting some forward momentum. And then on the 30th of November, the final aspect of the month will be Venus entering Sagittarius. So as you can see from the chart, we're now working with a lot of Sagittarius energy, a lot of fire energy, because we've got Venus and the Sun, Black Moon, Lilith, true position, Mars and Juno. Mars is coming up to a conjunction with Juno as well. So there's a lot going on in our Sagittarius house. So it might just be useful to just check in what's going on in this part of my life, because Venus going into this part of the chart is going to add that attraction factor. And so the heart is being called here. And generally with Venus and Sagittarius, when it comes to relationships, we kind of want to keep things on a nice loose rein. We don't want to feel tied down. We don't want to kind of really talk about commitment right now. We want to talk about adventure and exploring and where we're going together kind of in a fun way. Because Sagittarius has that kind of flickering energy of a fire that's always on the move. So yeah, we don't want to feel hemmed in when Venus is in Sagittarius. And so whether it's our relationships personally, or whether it's just the part of life that's being affected by all of this Sagittarius energy, we're getting a feeling that we need to expand. That's where the heart is being called right now, to these far horizons. So get creative. Ask yourself where you might need to invest in your future, and then follow that impulse, follow that heart's calling. This brings me to the end of this reading for November 2025. I hope you found it helpful. If you did, please do click a like, subscribe, leave a comment, because of course it always does help the algorithm. And if you would like to hear more from me, as I mentioned earlier, I have a Patreon, a Substack, website. Those links are all below as well. I will see you again soon. And in the meantime, I wish you many blessings on your path.